Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome back to another video. If you've been following my YouTube platform for any length of time, you know that I have a lot of cloud content that I've worked through, different cloud labs for learning cloud pen testing on AWS and Azure, and I think I did one GCP lab. I need to learn more about GCP, but I know when I'm working through those labs, it's super confusing to follow because I kind of assume you have this introductory knowledge to AWS, which I know many people do not because AWS is confusing. The names they use are confusing. The command line interface is confusing. The commands you need to know are confusing. And so in this video, I want this video to be an introduction to getting started with the AWS CLI or the command line interface. So if you're brand new to AWS, or maybe you've just dabbled in it a little bit in the console but know very little about the CLI and you want a detailed explanation of it, hey, this video is for you. And I want to give hats off, if I had a hat on, to the Cyber platform. CYBR, Cyber platform. I interviewed the founder, Christoph, a while ago and made a video about this platform not too long ago as well, and want to showcase some of their completely free labs to help people get started with AWS. So once again, the lab I'm going to go through today is completely free. You do not need a sub to Cyber to go through it. If you enjoy it, I recommend a sub. It's super affordable, gives you access to a bunch of content, but I won't repeat myself. You can watch my video about it. And also, it feels weird that I have to say this, but this is not a sponsored video. If you know me, you know that I don't make sponsored videos. So Cyber is not paying me, sponsoring me, or anything to make this video. Matter of fact, when I first interviewed Christoph, they actually offered me a free membership to Cyber, just kind of as a partnership. And I told them, no, I want to pay for it myself. I want to support what you guys are doing. And I don't want to have a bias when I talk about your platform. So not only do they not pay me, I bought a membership myself so I could work through the labs, work through the courses on their platform, and I've really enjoyed it. And I think these labs are super helpful for those who are new to AWS. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to jump back over to the dashboard. So here is a dashboard when you first get logged in. I will just say, if you get a subscription, I'll showcase this super quick, but with this sub, you do get access to all of their courses, and they're super high quality, hands-on demos. I just completed all of this course, Introduction to AWS Security, 74 lessons, went through the whole thing, and I highly recommend that. Excited to dive into the other courses, but a subscription really is worth it. They had a deal for a while where it was only $8 a month, but now, as of this recording or this live stream, it's $10 a month. It's still super affordable to do the yearly. So that's what I did. I just did $129 to get a full year membership. But once again, what I'm going to showcase today, you do not need a membership for. So if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube and you want to follow along, go ahead and pause this video and go make an account on Cyber, and you're able to follow along. No money needed, no subscription needed. You can do this right alongside of me. But to get to the lab, we're going to go up to Learn right here, and we're just going to click Hands-on Labs. We'll view our list of labs down here, and I want to begin with this very introductory lab on getting started with the AWS CLI. So let's go ahead and click that lab. And here's the cool thing about this. You don't have to even create your own AWS account. I'm just going to click Start Lab, and it's going to do a one-click lab. It's going to spin up a real AWS environment for us to interact with, and we'll even jump down while this loads because the first part doesn't need the lab. So let's just go through this slowly, and I'll do my best to explain it and do alongside of you. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So first things first, if you don't already have the AWS CLI installed on your machine, and let me explain what this is. When it comes to AWS, you can manage resources in really two ways. You can use the console, which is like a web application graphical interface where you can manage AWS resources, and you can use the AWS CLI or the command line interface within your terminal. Now, the reason it's important to know how to use the CLI is there are certain things that you can only do in the CLI that the same functionality isn't in the console, or it's a lot more difficult to do it in the console. Additionally, if you get into a DevOps, cloud engineer, sysadmin, pen testing, any kind of those roles, you're going to be making scripts, working on automation, and you need to know the AWS CLI as well as the Boto Core library through Python, but maybe we'll get to that in another lab. But you need to know the AWS CLI to understand the basics of automating things in the cloud. So this is really important to know if you want to get started with AWS, either red team, blue team, whatever it is. This will will be important. But of course, the first thing to do is to install the AWS CLI. Now, you can go to this page. It'll depend if you're doing this on Windows, Linux, what version of Linux. But I'm going to assume many of you are probably doing this in Kali, and it's super easy to install this in Kali. You just open up your terminal, sudo apt install AWS. I think it's like that. Let's see if I'm right. There we go. Sudo apt install AWS CLI. We'll give it a second. We'll see if it breaks my previous install of it. I think I installed it a different way when I first installed it. I didn't use the app package manager, but should be fine either way. I meant to say version. And there, if you do AWS -- version, you know that it worked. Although, it for some reason put an old version of the AWS CLI on here. I wonder if my packages are not updated. It should be AWS CLI 2.0 something. If you have the same issue, let me go and do sudo apt remove AWS CLI. Okay, so is this installing that? Which AWS? I'm just gonna do this the ghetto way. User local bin AWS. Oh. That's what I meant to do. Totally not the proper way to do it. Oh. Okay, sudo remove home Tyler local bin AWS. Is there more? Okay. Now let me try it. I think I screwed up my install because I had all these different versions of AWS CLI installed from various labs. We'll see if it works this way. If it doesn't, I'll show you how to do it directly through AWS. But hey, at least we'll show it a few different ways as we dive into this lab. Looking over at chat, Neflo said, only downside I found with that is you don't get the AWS completion. Oh, you don't? I didn't even realize that. That's good to know. Oh, so that's doing the old version. Okay, well, I take my words back. Maybe don't install it via the app package manager. Instead, let's do it via the documentation here. Which this is also super easy. It is just, you literally copy and paste it. So install or update the AWS CLI. We, of course, want to install it. And it says to install the AWS CLI, run the following commands. You can quite literally copy and paste this. Give it a second. It should install actually the latest version of the AWS CLI instead of the 1 point whatever version. Oh. Let's do update flag. It wants me to do the update flag, because it discovered my older version of it. I really jacked up my install here by trying to show you guys how to install it via the app package manager. This should fix it though. There we go. All right, it took me longer than one would think, but if you had a weird issue with me, like me, at least I showed you how to solve that issue. You do, when you do AWS version, you do want it to be a 2 point something. The 1.0 is the old version of the AWS CLI, and you might be missing some features there. So just make sure it's 2 point something, and you are good to go. And lesson learned: just follow the documentation. Don't try to use the app package manager. Apparently, the documentation does it a lot better. Blah, blah. If yours doesn't start with AWS CLI 2, like mine, it says a 1, that means you're using version 1, right? And we just upgraded it from version 1 after I accidentally installed version 1 over my version 2. Very confusing. But if we, oh, lab failed to load, come on. While I'm trying to showcase the lab, let me try this again. I've literally never had that happen before, and I've done quite a few of these labs. I've never had it tell me it failed to load. It is the curse, my friends, of live streaming. The moment you jump on stream, something is not going to work. But we can keep on reading through here. How to configure the CLI with access keys. So this, we won't be able to do this quite yet. We have to wait for this lab to hopefully launch for us. But we can explain a little bit about what access keys are. So to get programmatic access or access via the command line interface on AWS, you need what is called an access key and a secret. It's kind of like a username and a password. Your access key in and of itself isn't sensitive, although you don't generally want to just share it with anyone and everyone, because your access key can technically be used to then get your AWS account ID. Once again, not sensitive in and of itself, but someone might be able to target you in that way. But it's not overly sensitive in itself, but what is sensitive is the secret. That's sort of like the password is a long string. And so you configure the AWS CLI with a profile using the access key ID and the secret access key, and that's what it's going to show us how to do. If the lab will actually launch for me, we'll see if it does. And I'll probably just, for those of you watching this after the fact on YouTube, I'll do the magic of video editing. So we will stop it here and I will meet you when the lab is launched. Okay, we are back. Just took a little bit of time, but we now have the access key and the secret. So let's go ahead and work on configuring this stuff following the steps here. So one trick with the AWS CLI is you can configure profiles. So in other words, we can have multiple sets of credentials saved and we can make different requests depending on the profile that we are doing. And we just do it by saving it with a profile name. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to open up our terminal here. I'll clear this out and not mean to do that. Just zoom in a little bit for you all, and we'll do AWS configure. I'm going to give it a profile, and we'll just copy what the lab says. And I get cyber is fun, and it's going to ask us for an access key ID. And of course, if you launch the lab, you have that access key ID. So we'll jump over to this and drop it in there. And we want to grab our secret access key, so we'll grab that. Drop it in there. For our default region, it kind of depends on the lab that you're doing, but US East 1 is generally a safe bet. So we'll do US East 1, and I'll hit enter, and then enter again. And we now have that profile configured. Now, if we jump back over to our lab, here's a big thing to keep in mind. You do have to append -- profile anytime we're using those CLI credentials tied to that profile. Otherwise, if we didn't specify a profile, it just saves it in the default profile. But I always like specifying a profile, keeps it cleaner, and I'm usually working with multiple things together. Oh, hey, and we just got a subscriber on Twitch. MyKill86 just subscribed with Prime. Thank you, my friend. Hey, really appreciate the subscription. Thank you for the support and just for your kindness and generosity. All right, finding profiles on your local machine. When we configure the AWS CLI, it stores your information in a config file and a credentials file. So let's take a look. And hey, even a red team tip here. If you are doing a red team scenario, and let's say you get a shell on a machine, this is one spot you want to check. The same way you would check for SSH credentials, you can also check for AWS and Azure credentials in similar folders. So SSH is, of course, .ssh, while AWS is .aws, Azure is .azure, and that's where these files are stored. So I can show you the config profile real quick. If we go to CD home Tyler AWS, you can see we have a config and credentials. If we cat our config, you can see we have our one profile we set up, cyber is fun, in the region that we are in. And if we cat our credentials, you can see that the credentials we just added are in the credential folder. So if you were doing a red team engagement and you got shell access on someone's machine, you might be able to pivot into the AWS environment if they have these credentials stored here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to this. If you're using Vim, which I'm not, I always use Nano, but you can use Vim. If you get stuck on trying to exit out of Vim for the next 20 minutes, Christoph is really nice and shows you how to exit out of Vim. We can do the same thing with credentials. He says, I won't show you mine. I purposely cleared all my credentials for this lab. So yeah, you can't get access to my real AWS accounts. Issuing CLI commands. Before we do that, have chat. Michael said, Hola, I usually watch you on YouTube, but was bored on Twitch. Literally an hour ago, I checked if you were streaming, and then like 5 minutes later, you went live. Perfect timing. Hey, good to have you here. So here is like our who am I command in AWS. right? It's the who am I in AWS. It returns basic information about who we are based on the credentials used. And if you've ever watched my streams, whenever I get new access to an AWS account, I always do that once I set up my credentials to make sure I have access. So in Linux, we can do a who am I, right? And that says my username. I'm going to jump back over to cyber here. It says my username. Well, of course, AWS has to make it a little bit more confusing. So the typical who am I in AWS, when you first get access to AWS creds, is this: AWS STS get caller identity, and then whatever profile. And ours is cyber is fun. And then we have our user ID, we have our account ID, and we have our ARN, or our unique identifier for our object or our user in AWS. And we also have our username. This is our username, getting started with the AWS CLI, and we are Dana. So we have some basic information, the who am I of the AWS world. Let's jump back over to the lab. We are authenticated as a user. When working in AWS, you will frequently use roles, and roles work a little bit differently. So let's take a look at that now. Next, run this command to list out our role ARN. Role name is case sensitive. So you can see the command right here. I'm actually going to go like this. See if this will be too small. I think it will be fine. I wish I could close this tab. I don't think I can, but that's fine. We'll work with it. Let me scroll back down. Although you can copy and paste this out, I always recommend, whether you are learning AWS, whether you're learning Python, whether you just learn how to use Bash, try not to copy and paste from labs. Try to type it out, because it's important to build a muscle memory as you work on these different commands. Oh, next to my username at the top. Oh, beautiful. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kappa13. You're the real MVP. I appreciate that. But let's jump back over. Whoops, I think I got way too far down. Here's what I was saying. So although you can copy and paste it, I always recommend typing it out and understanding a little bit about what we're doing. So we're doing AWS and we're doing IAM. Now IAM is like the identity manager in AWS, so that makes sense. We want to list our roles, and then we want to query, and we just want to get a specific role. Now if we just do this, so you can see the difference, it's going to give us a bunch of roles, well, in our account, right? You can see all these roles in our account. But for the purpose of this lab, we just want to find out this AWS CLI role. So we will do that. AWS IAM. I'm actually going to clear my screen. We'll jump that back to the top. AWS IAM list roles, and we'll do a query, and we'll say, hey, here is the role name. Role name equals AWS CLI role, and then we'll close that out. I think my syntax is there, and don't forget to do the profile. Cyber is fun if you set it up with the profile. Okay, and that information gives us a little bit. So we have the role name, of course. We have the role ID. We have the role ARN, which we're going to need. So if you're following along, you want to go ahead and grab your role ARN, because it's going to be different than mine. And I recommend just dropping it so you have it elsewhere. We have our assume policy document. So we have allow on the root principle, and our action is we can assume a role if our ARN equals Dana, right? Which it does. If you remember, we did the who am I command, the AWS STS get caller identity. This is the ARN for our role. So what this is saying is that this user, us, can assume the role for the max duration right there. And I'm guessing that's what we are going to do. This role has been pre-created by the lab for us, and our user has access to assume it. Copy and paste the ARN somewhere you can reference, which is what I said. This return includes information about the assume role policy document, which is what tells AWS who the role trusts to assume it. And we can see that we have a special condition to allow our user Dana. That's the ARN equals on this condition right here. So if your ARN equals Dana, then you can assume this role. I won't go into more detail right now since it can get fairly complicated, but that's the gist of it. Let me know if you have questions in the comments below. So how to use roles with AWS CLI. Roles are different from users because they don't use long-term access keys. They use short-term credentials. There are a few ways you can do this, but I'm only going to show you one in this because it's a more convenient approach. Now that we know the role ARN, go back to your config file. We're going to edit this file, so I recommend using whatever text editor you're comfortable with, not necessarily Vim. It could even be Notepad if you want. If you're a real hacker, you would use MS Paint to edit it. From here, you'll see your existing profiles, and we need to add a new profile like this. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to CD home Tyler AWS, and we will do nano on my config. And here is that. And now we just need to set up the profile for the role that we're going to assume. So we'll do profile AWS CLI role like so. And our role ARN, this is the role ARN for the role we just saw in the CLI, and I saved mine right there, so I'm going to copy that, just like so. And then our source profile, it would be default if you didn't set a profile, but remember, we set a profile, so ours is going to be cyber is fun because it's the profile with the Dana user that has permission to assume that role. Control X, Y, to save, and now we can actually execute commands as that AWS CLI role, so we can run the who am I command in AWS. So let's try that. AWS STS get caller identity profile AWS CLI role like so, and we successfully assumed that role. Now you can see from this result that we are issuing commands as a role and not as a user, unlike earlier, which looked like user CLI. Right? We have it right here. Our assume role. That's how we know we're doing it from a role. We can now use this AWS CLI profile in order to temporarily assume that role's permissions instead of our user's permissions. And this is what can sometimes lead to things like privilege escalation. If you compromise a user who can then assume a role that has greater access than the user, you might be able to pivot deeper into the environment. And we see that a little bit here. It says this role has access to a file in Amazon S3. Now, you might be new to even Amazon S3. Amazon S3, I just sort of think of like FTP in the cloud, right? S3 buckets are a way of storing files in the cloud. And one of the things you actually check in a pen test or a red team engagement is whether S3 is configured properly. Sometimes, hopefully rarely now, but S3 buckets can allow anonymous public access the same way an FTP bucket can allow anonymous public access. One famous instance of that was the Capital Breach AWS S3 bucket. I believe that was the issue behind that. Let me see if I'm correct. Blah, blah. Okay, so this person hacked it. I think their hack, though, was literally just a misconfigured S3 bucket. Oh, does it not even say? I'm just skimming it, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Yeah, misconfigured S3 storage buckets. But that's what we're doing here, right? These ones aren't misconfigured per se, but our role that we have access to is access to the S3 bucket, or at least to list it out, and the other role doesn't. So let's try that. Here's an AWS S3 command. I know it looks confusing, but we can do AWS S3 API, list buckets. Let's first try our cyber is fun role. Cyber is fun. And we get access denied. But let's see if our new profile has access to the buckets. AWS CLI role. And you can see with that, we are able to list the buckets. We have the cyber data bucket and Christoph plus 12. We get access denied, etc., etc. How to navigate the AWS CLI documentation. Oh, Michael said, in the incident, Paige Thompson, who operated on the hacker handle Erratic, made off with more than 100 million credit applications that were held in a misconfigured Amazon Web Services storage bucket in the cloud. Yeah, exactly. The S3 bucket. So AWS documentation, we have a list of services. If we search for like STS here. Oh, yeah, there we go. So STS is how we did the who am I. And you can see the different things you can do with STS. Get caller identity is what we've been doing, but this is just the AWS documentation when you're looking stuff up. We have a synopsis section that looks like so. These are all the options we can submit with the get caller identity call. And whenever the options are wrapped in brackets, it means that they are optional. Instead, if they're not wrapped in brackets, that means they're required options you must provide to successfully issue the command. There are none for this particular call, but keep that in mind. So conclusion, roles are super important in AWS, as we'll explain and show in a separate course dedicated to IAM roles, which, hey, if you get a sub, you can check that out. But they will also be important in this course for a couple of the flags that you have to capture, which this is a lab from a course. Of course, I'm not going through the course all on stream, but congrats. That's the basics of working with the AWS CLI. So let's just review everything we covered. We figured out how to install the CLI and how to break the install if you accidentally break it while you're live streaming, like what I did, and getting the proper version of the AWS CLI on there. We learned how to configure the CLI with our access keys, the access key and the secret. We learned how to find profiles on our machine. This is helpful, once again, for pen testing or a red team engagement. If you get a shell on a machine, good spot to look to see if you can pivot into the AWS environment is the .aws file, similar to .ssh for your traditional CTFs, and you could grab the credentials from there. We learned how to issue some CLI commands. So remember, basic who am I in AWS is AWS STS get caller identity. It provides our user ID, our count, and our ARN for our user, as well as the username for our user. We learned how to use profiles. Of course, I didn't mind with the profile. Cyber is fun. We figured out how to query roles, and this one was limited to the AWS CLI role. And although these policy documents may be brand new to you, you can at least understand a little bit about this, right? We know that it's a assume role policy document, and it allows allows our user to assume this role, right? And then that role had greater access within the AWS environment. Our user couldn't list the S3 buckets, but the role that we assumed was able to list the S3 buckets. So we got some very basic use case of using the AWS CLI. And if you did not do this alongside of me, I would encourage you to do so. You do learn something from watching a video, but you learn even more by getting hands-on keyboard and working through the lab as well. And you have no excuse. This doesn't cost any money for you, a completely free lab that you can spin up and play around with the AWS CLI. So for those of you watching this video after the fact on YouTube, hope you found this helpful. A big shout out to Cyber for just the incredible platform and these introductory labs to help people get started with AWS CLI and all the fun and confusion that goes alongside of that. So thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next one.